The Diary of a Drug Fiend. I admit, um, okay, maybe we should, thank you. That will conclude the evening's entertainment. I will say this for Feckless. He always understood instinctively when he wasn't wanted, so immediately the arrangements were made. He excused himself hastily because he had to go down to the villa where his victim was staying and fix a dictaphone in the room where he was going to have dinner. So I had Lou all to myself until he came with the disguises the next day in the afternoon, and I wasn't going to waste a minute. I admit I was pretty sick about the way the white cloud let me down. I'd have gone after the silly old sun myself if I hadn't been a married man. However, there we were alone forever, Lou and I in Capri. It was all much too glad to be true. Too much good to be true. Sunlight and moonlight and starlight, they were all in her eyes, and she handed out the cocaine with such a provocative gesture. I knew what it was to be insane. I could understand perfectly well why the silly fools that aren't insane are afraid of being insane. I'd been that way myself when I didn't know any better. This rotten little race of men measures the world by its own standard. It is lost in the vastness of the universe and is consequently afraid of everything that doesn't happen to fit its own limits. Lou and I had discarded the miserable measures of mankind. That sort of thing is all right for tailors and men of science, but we had sprung in one leap to be conterminous with the universe. We were as incommensurable as the ratio of a circle to its diameter. We were as imaginary and unreal from their point of view as the square root of -1. We didn't ask humanity to judge us. It was simply a case of mistaken identity to regard us as featherless bipeds at all. We may have looked like human beings to their eyes. In fact, they sent in bills and things as if we had been human beings, but I refused to be responsible for the mistakes of the inferior animals. I humor them to some extent in their delusions because they're lunatics and ought to be humored. But it's a long way between that and admitting that their hallucinations have any basis in fact. I had been in their silly world of sense a million years or so ago when I was Peter Pendragon. But why recall the painful past? Of course, one doesn't come to one's full strength in a minute. Take the case of an eagle. What is it as long as it is in the egg? Nothing but an egg with possibilities. And the first day it's hatched, you don't expect it to fly to Neptune and back. Certainly not. But after day, in every way, but every day in every way, it gets better and better. And if I was ever tempted to flop and remember my base origin as a forked radish, why all I needed was a kiss from Lou or a sniff of cocaine to put me back into paradise. I can't tell you about those next 24 hours. Suffice it to say that all the world's records were broken and broken again, and we were simply panting like two hungry wolves when Feckless turned up with the disguises and the guns. He repeated those instructions and added one word of almost paternal counsel in a very confidential tone. You'll excuse me, I know. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you're not perfectly capable of taking care of yourself, but you haven't been in these parts before, and you must never forget the quick, violent tempers of these southern Italians. It's like one of these sudden gusts that the fishermen are so afraid of. It doesn't mean anything in particular, but it's often ugly enough at the moment, and what you have to do is to keep out of any kind of a row. There may be a lot of drunken ruffians in the Fauno Ebrio. Sit near the door, and if anybody starts scrapping, slip out quietly and walk up and down till it's over. You don't want to get mixed up with the fuss. I could see the wisdom of his remarks, although, on the other hand, I was personally spoiling for a fight. The one fly in the apothecary's ointment of the honeymoon, although I didn't notice it, was that something in me missed the excitement of the daily gambling with the death to which the war had accustomed me. Well, could that be why he was using drugs like that? Of course, it wasn't as dangerous back then when it wasn't adulterated and all that, but the slightest reminder of the wilder passions, a couple of boatmen quarreling, or even a tourist protesting about some trifle, sent the blood to my head, and I only wanted a legitimate excuse for killing a few hundred people. But nature is wise and kind, and I was always able to take it out of Lou. The passions of murder and love are inseparably connected in our ancestry. All civilization has done is to teach us to pretend to idealize them. The program went off without the slightest hitch. Our room opened on to a terrace in deep shadow. At this time of year, there was hardly anyone in the hotel, of course. A little flight of steps at the side of the terrace took us under an arch of twisted vines into the barely more than mule path that does duty for a road in Capri. No one took any notice of us. There were only strolling lovers, parties of peasants, singing as they walked to the guitar, and 2 or 3 tired, happy fishermen strolling home from the wine shop. We found the motor boat at the quay and lay lapsed in delight. It seemed hardly a minute later when we found ourselves in Sorrento, couched in a huge roadster. Without a word spoken, we were off at top speed. The beauty of the drive is notorious, and yet we were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. The world had been created afresh for our sakes. It was an ever-changing phantasmagoria of rapturous sounds and sights and scents, and it all seemed a mere ornamentation for our love, the setting of the jewel of our sparkling passion. Even the last few miles into the Pauls, where Naples or where the road runs through tedious commercialized suburbs, took on a new aspect. The houses were a mere irregular skyline. Somehow, they suggested to the jagged contour of a score of Debussy. But all this, exquisite as it was, gripping as it was in a way superficial. At the bottom of our hearts, there seethed and surged a white-hot volcanic lake of molten, of infernal metal. We did not know what hideous, what monstrous abominations were in store for us at the Gatto Fritto. I have set down how the action of the drugs had partially stripped off the recent layers of memory. It had achieved a parallel result much more efficiently on the moral plane. The toll of countless generations of evolution had been undone in a month. We still preserved to a certain extent the conventions of decency, but we knew that we did so only from ape-like cunning. We have reverted to the gorilla. No action of violence and lust, but seemed a necessary outlet for our energies. We said nothing to each other about this. It was, in fact, deeper and darker than could be conveyed by articulate speech. Man differs from the lower animals. Indeed, first of all, in this matter of language, the use of language compels one to measure one's thoughts. That is why the great philosophers and mystics who are dealing with ideas that cannot be expressed in such terms are constantly compelled to use negative adjectives or to rebuke the mind by formulating their thoughts in a series of contradictory statements. That is the explanation of the Athanasian Creed. Its clauses puzzle the plain man. One must itself be divine to comprehend divinity. The converse proposition is equally true. The passions of the pit find outlet only in the bestial noises. The automobile stopped at the end of the dirty little street where the Fauno Ebrio lurks. The motorman pointed to the zigzag streak of light that issued from it and cast a sinister gleam on the opposite wall. A bold, black-haired, short-skirted girl with a gaudy shawl and huge gold earrings was standing in the door. What with the long journey and the drugs and other things, we were a little drunk, just enough to realize that it was part of our policy to pretend to be a little more drunk than we were. We let our heads roll from side to side as we staggered to the door. We sat down at a little table and called for a drink. They served us one of those foul Italian imitations of liquors that taste like hair wash. But instead of nauseating us, it exalted us. We enjoyed it as part of the game. Dressed as low-class Neapolitans, we threw ourselves heartily into the part. We threw the fiery filth down our throats, as if it had been Caravoisier 1865. The drink took effect on us with surprising alacrity. It seemed to let loose those swarming caravans of driver ants that eat their way through the jungle of life like a splash of sulfuric acid flung in a woman's face. There was no cloak in the den, and of course we had left our watches at home. We got a little impatient. We couldn't remember whether Fekles had not told us how long he was likely to be. The air of the room was stifling. The lowest vagabonds of apples crowded the place. Some were jabbering like apes, some singing drunkenly to themselves, some shamelessly caressing, some sunk in bestial stupor. Among the last was a burly brute who somehow fascinated our attention. We thought ourselves quite safe in speaking English, and, for all I know, we were talking at the top of our voices. Lou maintained that this particular man was English himself. He was apparently asleep, but presently he lifted his head from the table, stretched his great arms, and called for a drink in Italian. He drained his glass at a gulp, and then came suddenly over to our table and addressed us in English. We could tell at once, from his accent, that the man had originally been more or less of a gentleman, but his face and his tone told their own story. He must have been going downhill for many years, reached the bottom long ago, and found it the easiest place to live. He was aggressively friendly in a brutal way, and warned us that our disguises might be a source of danger. Anyone could see through them, and the fact of our having adopted them might arouse the quick suspicion of the Neapolitan mind. He called for drinks and toasted King and the Country with a sort of surly pride in his origin. He reminded me of Kipling's broken-down Englishman. "Don't you be afraid," he said to Lou. "I won't let you come to any harm, a little peach like you. No blooming fear." I resented the remark with almost insane intensity. To hell with that fellow. He noticed it at once and leered with a horrible chuckle. "All right, mister," he said. "No offense meant." And he threw an arm around Lou's neck and made a movement to kiss her. I was on my feet in a second and swung my right to his jaw. It knocked him off the bench, and he lay flat. In a moment the uproar began. All my old fighting instincts flashed to the surface. I realized instantly that we were in for the very row that Fekles had so wisely warned us to avoid. The whole crowd, men and women, were on their feet. They were rushing at us like stampeding cattle. I whipped out my revolver. The wave surged back as a breaker does when it hits a rock. "Guard my back," I cried to Lou. She hardly needed telling. The spirit of the true Englishwoman in a crisis was aflame in her. Fixing the crowd with my eyes and my barrel, we edged our way to the door. One man took up a glass to throw, but the padrone had slipped out from behind the bar and knocked his arm down. The glass smashed to the floor. The attack on us degenerated into a volley of oaths and shrieks. We found ourselves in the fresh air and also in the arms of half a dozen police who had run up from both ends of the street. Two of them strode into the wine shop. The uproar ceased as if by magic, and then we found that we were under arrest. We were being questioned in voluble, excited Italian. Neither Lou nor I understood a word that was said to us. The sergeant came out of the dive. He seemed an intelligent man. He understood at once that we were English. Inglese? He asked. Inglese. And I forcibly echoed, Inglese, signor, Inglese. And if that settled the whole matter. English people on the continent have an illusion that the mere fact of their nationality permits them to do anything soever, and there is a great deal of truth in this, after all, because the inhabitants of Europe have a settled conviction that we are all harmless lunatics. So we are allowed to act in all sorts of ways which they would not tolerate for a moment in any supposedly rational person. In the present instance, I have little doubt that, if we had been dressed as ourselves, we should have been politely conducted to our hotel or put into an automobile without any more fuss, perhaps, than a few perfunctory questions intended to impress the sergeant's men with his importance. But as it was, he shook his head doubtfully. Arma pitate, he said solemnly, pointing to the revolvers which were still in our hands. I tried to explain the affair in broken Italian. Lou did what was really a much more sensible thing by taking the affair as a stupendous joke and going off into shrieks of hysterical laughter. But as for me, my blood was up. I wasn't going to stand any nonsense from these Italians, despite the Roman blood that is legitimately the supreme pride of our oldest families. We always, somehow, instinctively think of the Italian as a black. We don't call them Dagos and Wops as they do in the United States, with the invariable epithet of dirty. But we have the same feeling. I began to take the high hand with the sergeant, and that, of course, was quite sufficient to turn the balance against us. We found ourselves pinioned. He said, in a very short tone, that we should have to go to the commissariat. I had two conflicting impulses. One to shoot the dogs down and get away. The other to wish, like a lost child, that Feckless would turn up and get us out of the mess. Unfortunately for either, I had been very capably disarmed, and there was no sign of Feckless. We were marched to the police station and thrown into separate rooms. I cannot hope to depict the boiling rage which kept me awake all night. I resented ill-temperedly the attempts of the other men to be sympathetic. I think they recognized instinctively that I had got into trouble through no fault of my own, and were anxious to show kindness in their own rough way to the stranger. The worst of the whole business was that they had searched us and removed our standby, the dear little gold-topped bottle. I might have got myself into a mood to laugh and the whole thing off, as had so often happened before, and I realized for the first time the dreadful sinking of heart that comes from privation. It was only a hint of the horror so far. I had enough of the stuff in me to carry me through for a bit, but even as things were, it was bad enough. I had a feeling of utter helplessness. I began to repent having repulsed the advances of my fellow prisoners. I approached them and explained that I was a signor Inglese with a molto denaro, and if anyone could oblige me with a sniff of cocaine, as I explained by gesture, I should be practically grateful. I was understood immediately. They laughed sympathetically with perfect comprehension of the case, but as it happened, nobody had managed to smuggle anything in. There was nothing for it but to wait in the morning. I lay down on a bench I found myself the prey of increasingly accurate irritation. The hours passed like the procession of Banquo's heirs before the eyes of Macbeth, and a voice in me kept saying, Macbeth hath murdered sleep. Macbeth shall sleep no more. Oh, that's an exclamation mark, sorry. And I had an appallingly disquieting sensation of being tracked down by some invisible foe. I was seized with a perfect, unreasonable irritation against Feckless, as if it were his fault, and not my own, that I was in this mess. Strangely enough, you may think, I never gave a thought to Lou. It mattered nothing to me whether she were suffering or not. My own personal psychological sensations occupied the whole of my mind. I was taken before the commissario as soon as he arrived. They seemed to recognize that the case was important. Lou was already in the office. The commissario spoke no English, and no interpreter was immediately available. She looked absolutely wretched. There had been no conveniences for toilet, and in the daylight, the disguise was a ridiculous travesty. Her hair was tousled and dirty. Her complexion was sallow, mottled with touches of unwholesome red. Her eyes were bleared and bloodshot. Dark purple rims were round them. I was extremely angry with her for her unprepossessing appearance. It then occurred to me for the first time that perhaps I myself was not looking like the Prince of Wales on Derby Day. The commissary was a short, bull-necked individual, evidently sprung from the ranks of the people. He possessed a correspondingly exaggerated sense of his official importance. He spoke almost without courtesy, and appeared to resent our incapacity to understand his language. As for myself, the fighting spirit had gone out of me completely. All I could do was to give our names in the tone of voice of a schoolboy who has been summoned by the headmaster, and to appeal for the consul Inglese. The commissary's clerk seemed excited when he heard who we were, and spoke to his superior in a rapid undertone. We were asked to write our names. I thought this was getting out of it rather nicely. I felt sure that Sir would do the trick, and VC, KBE could hardly fail to impress. I'm not a bit of a snob, but I really was glad for once to be of some sort of importance. The clerk ran out of the room with the paper. He came back in a moment, beaming all over, and called the attention of the commissary to one of the morning newspapers, running his finger along the lines with suppressed excitement. My spirits rose. Evidently some social paragraph had identified us. The commissary changed his manner at once. His new tone was not exactly sympathetic and friendly, but I put that down to the man's plebeian origin. He said something about consul, and he had us conducted to an outer room. The clerk indicated that we were to wait there, no doubt, for the arrival of the consul. It was not more than half an hour, but it seemed an eternity. Lou and I had nothing to say to each other. What we felt was a blind ache to get away from these wretched people, to get back to the Caligula, to have a bath and a meal, and above all to ease our nerves and a good sniff dose of heroin and a few hearty sniffs of cocaine. And remember, of course, it was legal back then, which, I mean, legality of a drug, non-legality of a drug, it doesn't all of a sudden make the thing moral, right? But one vulnerability is that if a person ever gets locked up, the other prisoners see a bit of what is going on. A person winding down from drugs, and it's seen as a weakness. And also, a person picks themselves up or gets themselves into a state, then they're less than the regular state coming down, and so there's that issue of being without. From the Vispa Humata, All good thoughts, good words, and good deeds are produced with good intelligence. All evil thoughts, evil words, and evil deeds are not produced with good intelligence. All good thoughts, good words, and good deeds lead to heaven. You know, we're using a metanomial here, right? All evil thoughts, evil words, and evil deeds lead them to hell. Of all this good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, heaven thus manifests to the righteous person. I don't know if the explanation is part of the new volume or not, so I'm going to leave that out. Starting Dwa Nam Satayashna. May there be gratification of Hormazd. I begin this prayer in the name of God, who is the bestower of good things, forgiver of sins, merciful, and praise his name, Hormazd, who always was, is, and will be, whose name is God, the beneficent Spirit, and who is the Spirit amongst the spiritual ones. His own one name is Hormazd, that Lord is the greatest, powerful, wise, creator, nourisher, protector, caretaker, virtuous, forgiver of sin, dispenser of justice, and all-powerful. Now let's turn for a brief incursion into my own spiritual diary. For another strain here. I wrote abbreviated letter verses, you know, those 29 chapters start that, 30 verses. In the Quran. Saturday the 23rd, I watched the Indigo Revolution, Evolution and the Extras, Pir Zia Inayat Khan, Sufism's contribution to planetary culture. I discoursed with the next door neighbor on special ceremonies and alternative views of evidence. I listened to Azenje Kurana, Sunday the 24th, Yusuf Islam tracks, Brotherhood in Islam. I think that's a separate program to that. I watched Indigo Evolution and Extras, Awakening the Heart, Sufism's contribution to planetary culture, listening to Ari Zafar, Kasami, Quran, Amber Sin Offering, Peacock? Okay. Peacock. Oh, mine Sin Offering. Okay. Monday the 25th, Sleep City on Abghani, Surah 24. I listened to Hebrew songs, Sufi music, A Beginner's Guide to Dream Interpretation. I watched Nizam Manat Jahri and Jason Reza Ian present Iran, America, A World Between. Pirza Inayat Khan, Sufism's contribution to planetary culture. Amber, Purity of Mind, Scent Offering, Tuesday the 26th, A World Between, A Paradise. A Pedersia Suf. Okay, what's that? I don't know what that says. I think it's a Paradisifium? I don't know. Pir Shabda Khan, Interview and Dances of Universal Peace. It's a Sufi order in North Carolina. It centers out there. Like they pick a chant in a different language, a different religion, and they have a dance to it. And you never know what religion or theology they're going to really be practicing that particular night. Eslim Omar. The Yoga Sutra, I read the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali to page 200. James Houghton Woods, Enochian Key 2, 3:12 to 4:33 p.m. Wednesday the 24th. Wednesday the 27th, Sleep City on Al-Qani, Surah 5. I watched A World Between, Nizam Jahri and Jason Reza Ian. Pir Shabda Inayat Khan, Interview and Dances of Universal Peace, Friday, October 17th, 2008. Of course, this wasn't 2008 when I was watching it, but Amber, Peace of Mind, Cinder Offering, 7:50 to 8:11 p.m. The third Enochian key, I listened to Elijah yeah, 2, probably the second 30th of the Crawl, something like that. Thursday, the 28th, I watched the Iran, America, A World in Between, Pure Shabda Anayat Khan, Dances the Universal Peace. Enochian Key, Author 15, Key 19, Author 15. I saw a sky blue rounded ring, large beyond what I can describe at the time. Inside it was a light beam. I recall not of it except that it made numerous symbolic gestures. I knew not what most of them meant. I listened to more Devan Abdul Samed Bushtalik and A Beginner's Guide to Dream Interpretation. But the eighth, I don't know what that is. The Enochian Key, 19th Enochian Key, Author 15 again, 7:02 to 8:05 p.m. Friday the 29th, I watched Pir Shabda Anayat Khan, Universal Dances of Peace, interviews with Awakening the Heart, Iran, America, World in Between. I read Ensign, September 1984, and I had the opportunity to get more Ensigns. I've wanted to, be appreciative of them more, and I thought if I took too many, my chances of damaging them in transport would have been more difficult, so I kind of reject that, not taking those old church magazines. But Enochian Key 5, 2:52 to 5:11 p.m. I listened to Nazem Jastub Vedra Sayed al-Misri al-Hujarat, May 17th, 2003, Seattle program. Duaz Abdul Malik Vabeski yeah, I think it's Bosnian, so you say yeah with the J there. Saturday the 30th of May, I read the Ensign, January 7th, January of 1979, I watched Iran, America, A World in Between, Pir Shabda Anayat Khan, Universal Dances of Peace, interview, started Sleep Study on Abdul Ghani, Surah 29. I listened to Surah Baqarah, Surah Al Okay, I think that's kind of jumbled there. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure. Oh, maybe it's not this verses. So maybe it's not the whole one. Enochian Key 6, 5:55 to 6:11 p.m. I went to the lecture at Masjid An-Nur, Lessons from the Life for Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Dr. Shahriar Ahmed. Sunday the 31st, I watched Iran, America, World in Between, Pir Shabda Anayat Khan, Universal Dances of Peace. I listened to Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I read page 296 of those Yoga Sutra ones. I shared that on my page, by the way. It's an old enough book. Qari Zephyr Qasami, Rose Scent Offering, representing divination, Enochian Key 7, 4:21 to 5:16 p.m. Monday, June 1st, 2009. Enochian Key 8, 6:50 to 7:07 p.m., 7:08 to 7:24 p.m. Amber Peace of Mind Scent Offering, 8:20 to 8:30 p.m. I listened to Amina Allahi, Surah Yusuf,
Fahamakran, the Dua, Pir Shubda Inayat Khan, Interview and Dance is the Universal Peace, Stigmata, Marked for Life, Tuesday the 2nd, Sleep CD on Madhani 17. Oh, Stigmata, Marked for Life, I watched the program again. Peter Kingsley interview, Awakening the Heart. Good conference series. The Golden Sufi Center, you can, I think they've put it on their YouTube channel now. Listen to Faham Quran Dua was part 1. Read Mysteries of the Unknown, Master Index and Illustrated Symbols, Time Life Books. Wednesday the 3rd, Sleep Seed on Abdulqani 40, watch Stigmata, Marked for Life. At the 16th through 19, 2008, interviews with Peter Kingsley. He's an interesting sort. I probably, more than the Universal Dance's Peace guy, I probably disagree with him the most, but that doesn't matter. It's well worth reading and listening to his stuff. Not a priority with my spending though, but listen to Faham Quran Dua, Para 2 and 3, Enochian Key 9, 4 to 4:10 p.m., 4:51 to 5:03 p.m., 5:07 to 5:19 p.m. Resent offering. Oh, it was Stringia Vulgaris. I'm not sure what that means. Harmony, love, memory, modesty, peace. And I'm going to stop there and move to a new program.